I'm Roy Lee Lindsay with the North Carolina Pork Council, and I want everyone to remember bacon makes everything better.
It's college basketball season in the Bold North State, and you are logged into Time Out on the North Carolina Sports Network. Led as always by our top duo at the top of your screen. To your right, he is the former North Carolina Sportscaster of the Year, two-time David Glenn, also a practicing attorney, entrepreneur, and best-selling author. And then it's the coach, Kerry Keating, former head coach at Santa Clara, longtime assistant coach, and a former college basketball player at Seton Hall. And then you have me, the former director of athletics, Mike Waddell, with you here each and every week. And guys, I have to ask you, how was your holiday season? How was your New Year's as we rang in 2025 about a week ago?
Well, Mike, it was great here in Raleigh, North Carolina. You know that our family expanded this year, so that was with my son getting married in November, and Sydney, his wife, becoming a part of our now extended family. It just had a different vibe and energy about it. Everybody did stay here, so we got to pretend like it was the old days when our children were small and they kind of came down the steps to all the presents under the Christmas tree. But it was a great time here in Raleigh, and it's great to be back with you and Coach again here in 2025.
Hey, congrats, Dave, and happy holidays to everybody. We were fortunate to stay local here. A lot of holiday hoops in the high school scene here in Raleigh, obviously with the John Wall Invitational. A lot of teams coming in from out of town, a couple California teams, some from the north of us in Virginia. So we were able to take in a day of that, get some winter golf in, which is always the benefit of being here in North Carolina for the most part, although now we're suffering through a little bit of some wintry mix for this next week, it seems. But very low key with family, friends, and a quaint holiday, if you will, ready to go tonight into 2025.
Some of the suffering also being done on the courts right now in the Atlantic Coast Conference. I was watching ACC PM the other night, and Mark Packer, man, he laid in to the ACC, saying if you weren't in the top 100 of the net rankings, he wasn't even going to talk about you. The ACC is off to a pretty bleak start here in the 2024-25 season. In the quad one games, fellas, 14-53, but in the quad two games, only 13-28. David, have you ever seen the ACC at this point in the season struggling this much on a national scale?
Not that I recall, and I've been covering this league since 1987, so that's a pretty darn long time now. And the bottom line, Mike, is that we all remember when the Atlantic Coast Conference was 8 teams or 9 teams, right? And back then, there were actually years where the ACC would have 5 or 6 out of their 8 or 9 that were NCAA tournament caliber teams with those sorts of resumes, whether you were looking at that snapshot here in January or, of course, when it matters most on Selection Sunday. And the reality is that this year, this ACC may not have 6 teams out of 18 that are NCAA tournament worthy. That would be a train wreck disaster. There's a long way to go. There's certainly good teams at the top, but the midsection of the ACC is soft. The bottom of the ACC is bad. And, of course, the finances don't work very well when you're getting 5 or 6 out of 18. The finances worked great if you got 5 or 6 out of your 8 or 9 members back in the day, meaning the 80s and the 90s when Florida State joined the league. So you know the deal. In recent years, there has been this narrative that the ACC was unfairly criticized during the regular season. And then some of those years, they kind of knocked it out of the park during the NCAA tournament. And in their eyes, they proved the false narratives of the regular season. This year, there's no false narrative. The criticism is justified. There are not a lot of good resumes. There are not a lot of good teams. So the only thing the ACC should do, rather than moaning that the big bad media is beating them up unfairly, is win some freaking basketball games. And of course, now that you're in conference play, every big win is at the expense of a fellow conference member. They've already missed their opportunity to build their resumes in the usual ways, which is mainly by beating your top non-conference competition. Few teams have done that, but probably 14 out of the 18 haven't done that very well at all.
They really haven't. And Kerry, you've coached nationwide. You've been a head coach, an assistant coach, And the ACC has lost a lot of coaching talent over the last couple of years. Roy Williams, Mike Krzyzewski, Jim Boeheim, Tony Bennett before the start of the season. Now Jim Larrañaga in the season. Leonard Hamilton with his NIL lawsuit looking like he could be on the way out, but that's kind of expected. He's in his mid-70s, but how much has this coaching talent leaving the Atlantic Coast Conference had an impact on this league losing face on the court?
John Shire and Capel have played for Coach K, so they've seen success on the court at a very, very high level. But this transition into the new age of college basketball, this professionalization of it, is going to also require the coaches to make an adjustment. John at Duke, they got ahead of this curve and hired a quote-unquote GM to kind of handle the players' NIL deals way before almost anyone else did. And although that's not a basketball person, it's a basketball-related person. Rachel Baker worked for the Nike AAU circuit. Her father, Rod Baker, was a longtime coach in college. And so she has that background. But you're kind of seeing now these older coaches, Coach Larrañaga, two-time Final Four coach, national championship coach, and Tony Bennett. They just don't have the patience and the wherewithal to be able to have to oversee that, because you got to remember, the older guard of coaches oversaw everything. They were told to have their hands in everything. They were punished if they didn't know everything. There were NCAA punishments that came down when you didn't have oversight of what was happening on your staff. You couldn't claim that the doors were closed and I didn't know. Now it's kind of shifted back the other way where no one really knows what's going on. It's a rogue society out there. The ACC is suffering at the wrath of the SEC, who did that maybe behind those closed doors and out and about. Now it's above, and look at the result. The coaches are leaving, the players are coming. The coaches are staying in the SEC because they're kind of in that mode anyway, if you will. And now the SEC is reaping the benefits of this, to where we could easily see 4 SEC teams, depending on how the brackets shake out, in the Final Four. Gosh, they're going to have a quarter of the field coming out of their conference anyway, so the odds are that should happen. But as a result to the ACC, this shift is a very precarious position for them. From a media standpoint, from a product standpoint, from how they adjust in this coaching. I'm sure we're going to get to this later in the show. You've got a program in Wake Forest right on the cusp of that right now. Steve Forbes is a really, really well-respected coach. Haven't had NCAA success in the last 5 years. They're second best players on Kentucky's roster this year. There's a lot of things they have to kind of shake out, and they may have a chance, while all the other things the Dukes and the Carolinas figured out with their brand, to maybe take that step that personally I don't think NC State has or will. But it's an interesting time right now as far as the coaches go, Mike. You have a lot of different personalities. It's going to shift towards a younger generation of being able to deal with those kids as players. And the ones that can remove the ability to have to oversee and manage their personal lives, put that in the hands of a trusted advisor and then coach the team. And this is where I give John Shire all the credit. Talented roster, young roster with a little bit of a mix of some transfers in there and fifth-year kids. They put themselves in a position to have a Final Four run, and he's not dealing with anything but coaching the team. And look what happens when he's not even there. Doesn't even go to the SMU game. They don't skip a beat. SMU is a top 40 team and 5th in the league right now in the net, and they handled them easily without their head coach on the sideline. So maybe a sign of things to come, and certainly not the last of the coaches that we see are going to leave this game in the next coming years.
We're going to talk about each of the Big Four schools with a little mid-season report with David Glenn and Kerry Keating right here on Timeout on the North Carolina Sports Network. But guys, before we take our break and get to that mid-season report on the Big Four, I have to ask you, has the transfer portal led to some of this parity as well? Because I can't remember a time I've even thought about SMU as a basketball team. Yeah, they had some guys, here and there. Larry Brown, Tim was out there for a while. They've had, a little bit of this and that in basketball, but you're starting to see a change at the guard. And it seems like if you're a new coach, like Andy is this year in Dallas, you can go in and with the portal and with enough money, and SMU has the money, David, they can get pretty competitive pretty quick. They may not be there right now, but the fact that they're even in the top half of the ACC is pretty impressive from where they've come from.
Yeah, Mike, I think you, with your questions today, are putting your fingers on two of the biggest pieces of the puzzle in terms of the answer to the question, why is the SEC up in basketball? Why is the ACC down in basketball? Coach Keating just gave us the coaching part of it. And quick reminder, whereas a decade ago, it would have been the ACC bragging about Not just Coach K and Roy Williams and Jim Boeheim, but also Rick Pitino was at Louisville about a decade ago. Fast forward, it's a really proven winner like Bruce Pearl at Auburn. It's a really proven winner like Rick Barnes at Tennessee. It's a really proven winner like Buzz Williams at Texas A&M. And in that case, it's perfectly symbolic because Virginia Tech lost maybe the greatest coach in men's basketball history at that school to Texas A&M of the SEC, which backed up the Brinks truck and hired Buzz Williams to coach the Aggies at the expense of the Hokies, who are now one of the worst teams in the ACC. The other piece of this puzzle, and it's not all coaching, it's not all transfer portal, it's not all name, image, likeness, but it's all one big perfect storm. The reality is that the ACC, most of its best players as we speak, were recruited the old-fashioned way, right? Cooper Flagg, Duke, out of the high school ranks. R.J. Davis, UNC, out of the high school ranks. Stanford has a big guy named Maxime Reynaud, one of the best players in this league. He might be first-team All-ACC in the Cardinals' first year as an ACC member. Recruited the old-fashioned way from the high school ranks. Pitt's best player is a sophomore point guard named Jalen Lowe. Jeff Capel recruited him the old-fashioned way from the high school ranks. And there's nothing wrong with that, of course. Hunter Salas would be at Wake Forest the best player. He was a transfer from Gonzaga. So that's a great example of an ACC school using the name, image, likeness concept, immediate eligibility for transfers, which we didn't always have. Hunter Salas of Wake, a Chucky Hepburn, the new point guard at Louisville. They would be examples of transfer guys. When you look at the SEC guys, Janai Broome of Auburn, maybe the best player in that league, maybe a National Player of the Year candidate. He's a major college transfer for the Auburn Tigers. The best player at Tennessee, Chaz Lanier, major college transfer. The best player at Alabama, the point guard Mark Sears that drove the Tar Heels and others crazy in last year's NCAA tournament, major college transfer. The best player at Florida, Walter Clayton, major college transfer. So the SEC, which makes all that money in football, not only has accumulated more of the old head proven winner coaches, that's a nucleus of the best players in the league that those SEC programs got. How? Not the old-fashioned way, but by throwing around a lot of name, image, likeness money to not only sign those guys who are going to be first or second team all SEC, but later in their careers to keep those guys with that big NIL money. The ACC has more of the old-fashioned recruits, right? Seth Trimble of UNC, recruited from high school. Jameer Watkins of Florida State, one of the best players in the league, recruited from high school. The big guy at Clemson, Ian Shefflin, recruited from high school. Again, there are exceptions in the ACC, but the SEC has a much better blend of recruited from high school stars and these big money major college transfers who are reaching for the NIL money and then staying at those SEC schools because they can afford to keep them with that above-the-board money that Coach Keating's talking about. Those are two of the biggest puzzle pieces that explain why the ACC is down in basketball right now and why the SEC is up.
Yeah, Mike, I think this is just to come over the top on that. The SEC are the Yankees and the ACC are becoming the Oakland A's. I mean, this is really what it's going to become. I mean, it really can be that cut and dry. And to David's point, the key in my estimation as a coach in the ACC is the development, and we talked about this last week, the brand of where I'm at and the relationships I can establish at Clemson, in Carolina, in the Triangle, in Wake. Is that going to be enough to keep me there, or am I going to jump ship and go for more money? So now the ACC kind of has to get over their own stubbornness of the past and understand this is a transition. And we need to have that attitude and maybe invest some more money somehow, some way to keep these players. It used to be keeping the players to develop them, give them a chance to play in the NBA. And I just think this perfect storm of these last 4 years, and maybe they got, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later as far as Carolina goes, they might have gotten stuck in a purgatory of an Armando Bacot staying there for 6 years out of loyalty to Carolina. But if you really pressed them on it, the loyalty might have been to those millions out of the NIL. It just happened to happen that way. And now they have a void. And this is kind of a microcosm of maybe with the whole conference. It's going to be fascinating to see how the conference as a whole steps back, while there's still a conference, by the way, because we all know this may all go by the wayside and just be 4 groups of 20 in regions. But while they still are and have an opportunity to control that, it's going to be really fascinating to see. And to your point, Mike, in the beginning, David, the effect it'll have on some of these coaches wanting to stay there. They'll become more transient than they were before. You may lose some of the older guard, but I'll be really fascinated to see some of these younger coaches that have had some relative success, maybe at other levels, be it mid-major or high major, if they, in fact, will put themselves at the forefront. And look what John Calipari, that's what Calipari did. He beat that horse out of town and go to his buddy in Arkansas and get some more money, took his players with him. That may be not a typical example, but for these younger guys, it may be a precedent setting like, hey, I can get guys. Now we can all go. We can use Carolina to develop and take a run at this. You know what? I don't know. I think Vanderbilt might want to take a shot at this. Let's all go to Vanderbilt and hang out in Nashville together. There's nothing stopping anybody from doing that. It's just a matter of what the schools decide they actually want to do at the top. And it's an interesting time to be in that ACC office right now. I'll tell you that much.
Hey, Mike, and real quick to Coach's point, all 3 of us are in our 50s. To me, it is not as impactful if 70-plus-year-old Roy Williams retires and says, yeah, I didn't like that name, image, likeness stuff. That was one piece of the puzzle, but he was also 70-plus years old. The guy was going to retire soon anyway. Coach K, same thing. Jim Boeheim, same thing. Jim Larinaga, same thing. I'm not saying ignore those guys. I'm just saying they were going to retire anyway. When the greatest coach in Virginia history retires at our age, and who knows if he comes back, we'll see, or the greatest, I think, if not the greatest, one of the greatest football coaches in Wake Forest history, Dave Clawson, retires at our age. I'm not talking just another coach. These are among the best that Virginia and Wake have ever had in those respective sports. And they both specified so many of the differences that have hit college athletics over these last 5 years. A lot of folks will say more change in 5 years than in the previous 30 years combined. Dave Clawson didn't like it and got out. Tony Bennett didn't like it and got out. When the best coaches in our age bracket are making those decisions, that's when you know that the proverbial stuff is really hitting the fan in the ACC, especially right now. Michael Berard, Managing Director Investments with the Founders Group at Stifel, works with a select group of high net worth individuals and institutions to develop and implement investment plans tailored to their specific objectives and risk tolerances. If you are interested in highly personalized, well-researched guidance and outstanding personal service, you can contact Michael at 984-364-2002. That's 984-364-2002. Stifel Nicholas and Company Incorporated, member SIPC and NYSE. The Original Salt Works has become a legendary breakfast, brunch, and lunch place in Wilmington for both locals and out-of-town visitors over the last 50-plus years. Our good friend Bob Hubbard owns the place, but he's also the one cooking your food and often roaming the dining room to greet you with a smile and to make sure your visit is a great one. Bob has been running the show at this unique roadside diner for more than 20 years now, and he and his friendly, hardworking staff aim to treat you like one of their own. Try Bob's homemade omelets or special recipe grits for breakfast or his legendary cheeseburgers for lunch. The Original Salt Works, your breakfast and lunch choice on Oleander Drive in Wilmington.
Let's push ahead now with our Big Four midseason report. We're going to start it in Winston-Salem with Steve Forbes and the Demon Deacons of Wake Forest. Right now, fellas, the Deacs are 11-4 overall, a perfect 2-0 in a young AC season. They've won their last 2 games, and they are 1-4 in quad 1 games. So they're right on the periphery right now of being relevant on the national stage. What does everybody think about Wake Forest? Let's start with you, Dave.
Well, I'm intrigued to ask Coach when it's his turn, his thoughts on one, and the two of you could actually elaborate on this. I'm curious, just from the writer's point of view, how communication goes between a head coach, which Coach has been for a long time, and an athletic director, which Mike was for a long time. And I love Steve Forbes personally. He's a great guy. He's media friendly. He's transparent. He's humorous. I love the guy. He's in year 5 and hasn't been to the NCAA tournament yet. And right now, the Deacs are underperforming compared to the expectations created by Hunter Salas making the NBA weight, first team All-ACC. There's from the outsider point of view, I don't need to be a coach or an AD to know that part of the conversation is, hey, Coach Forbes, year 5, Hunter decided to stay. You got to make the big dance, man. We got you this App State forward named Trayvon Spillers. You got Hunter. You got the Gonzaga transfer, Afton Reed down low. Like, it's time to kick the door down after having some NIT caliber teams. So I'm curious as to how you guys chime in on that. And from the coach's perspective, I also want Coach Keating, if you will, to elaborate on the concept of trying to win without a true point guard. Because if I boiled down what's happening at Wake Forest right now, when you look at the individual pieces, right? Cameron Hildreth is a hardworking, unafraid, in-your-face, will defend you to the death, attack the rim, get to the free throw line, hit some threes. He's a role player kind. He's not an all-ACC guy, but I'd want him on my team, right? And you got Hunter, this NBA caliber talent who might go in the first round. You have a quality big guy, Afton Reed. You have the App State transfer. He's kind of a rebounder, defender, glue guy, Trayvon Spillers. And you have some other guys. There is only one true point guard on the entire Wake roster. And just as Hubert Davis is being criticized for not having a high caliber post player, poor roster construction, some are calling it. No matter how good a coach you are, if you don't have a quality big guy, some of your options become limited. Same thing. No matter how good of a coach you are, if you don't have a functional true point guard, a lot of times the engine just doesn't work as well. The cylinders don't hit as nicely. And Tyler Johnson is a true point guard, and he was at Louisville last year. I asked Steve Forbes this exact question. He told me, paraphrasing, DG, don't worry about it. Guards are guards. And I'm like, I don't know, man. Hunter's not a point guard. And Hildreth is not a point guard. And offenses don't work as well without that guy. And sure enough, what's happening at Wake right now? They have the best defense of Steve Forbes' 5 years there. They're scratching and clawing and defending and rebounding better than they used to. Why are they no closer to the correct side of the NCAA tournament bubble? Because their offense is a mess on some nights. It was just great against NC State the other day, but for the season, it has not been a good Wake Forest offense. And the last thing I would like to see from afar is a really good guy like Steve Forbes faceplant in year 5 because he was caught without a point guard when he certainly had enough accessories around a functional point guard to cash in year 5 with an NCAA tournament team, which he might still, but he's going to need a heck of a regular season to pull that off.
Yeah, David, just to highlight your point, defensively rated in the top 30 of the country, offensively rated in the bottom 130. You're at 177 offensively, 29th defensive right now per KenPom. Going on the stats part of that, and to kind of wrap some of those thoughts into the why. Look at their next 4 games really, because they have Duke, Carolina, Duke back-to-back at home, albeit at Miami versus Stanford, at Virginia Tech, and then the lingering Carolina game. These 4 games will dictate whether we're talking about Wake Forest even having a chance to be the proverbial Seth Greenberg at the end of the season. Hey, we deserve to be in because we're in a great league and we have this gaudy record. Now, they lost to Xavier by 15, lost to A&M by 13, lost to Florida by 17, lost to Alabama in an exhibition by 20. Their closest top 25 game was a loss to Clemson by 9. They haven't really been close. So let's unpack that from a guard standpoint, because especially in this game, especially in this day and age, with what's happening above them with the jacking of threes, and I think 40 just got shot in the time we took this taping to go at the NBA level. You've got 3 guards. You said Salas, Spillers, and Johnson. None of them are even shooting 30% from 3. So if guards are guards and you're going to play in a committee, you really need those 3 guys to be playing off each other when they're that dynamic to be able to draw the defense to get one of them going per night. When your best player is missing 7 out of every 10, and I'll go back to the analytics that Dean Smith made famous in points per possession. If the barometer is 1, all right, and you're only coming up with 9 every 10 possessions when your best leading scorer, if your leading scorer playing 36 minutes a game can't shoot from a guard position over 30%, your defense has to be that good. It has to be better than good. It's good enough to get them to 11-4. Is it good enough to beat proverbial bad teams right now? Teams that are struggling. Changes at Miami. You mentioned Stanford, kind of a middling team, but 1-3 in the league right now. Not making that 2 time zone change so seamlessly just yet. Virginia Tech, 6-8, bottom of the barrel. And then you have that huge matchup at home with Carolina. Now you come out of that, and if you're 15, if you win all 4 by hook or crook, now maybe you can go back and reset going into the middle of January when you really want to get to February playing your best basketball and see if Steve's made some changes to the offensive side of it with Salas, with Spillers, with Johnson. Are these guys that are going to carry them, and are these the guys who are going to live up to their expectations? Statistically, it doesn't show that way. And the original point, which wrapping all this up in, a lot of this can be rectified with a dynamic coach on the floor in a point guard position. You can overcome a lot of offensive deficiencies if you have that homegrown fifth-year guy, or if you've got that really battle-tested fifth-year transfer that's got a body on him, that has won games at other places, that has the mentality of a coach. Me personally, I always wanted to have that point guard on the floor, or at least wanted to have 2 other guards that were so much of a threat inside and out, touching the paint, making plays happen for our bigs. And I just don't know if Wake has that right now. And what they're faced with coming into 2025 is, yes, they got a win they needed to get against State. They needed to win that game. They lose that game, this thing could go south quick. So now here you are on this big 4-game stretch, and coaches say, next game, they'll Bill Belichick it to death, and that's the way to do it. But we can step back and look at them right now and say, okay, these next 2 weeks for Wake Forest really, I think, will make or break their season. And not just from the record standpoint, David. I think even if they go 2-2, even if they drop one of those first 3 and, of course, maybe lose to Carolina, it's a home game. 3-1, take those stats out. And I think 2 weeks from now, let's revisit this and let's look at their statistics as a team and individual with this. Guards are guards. Okay, if they're guards, then let's step up and be guards. There'll be a direct correlation between those results and those 3 guards for sure. And then if the defense can elevate itself and ramp itself up, which you can always do, because you don't need the ball to do that. That's an effort thing. That's a connectivity thing. I know Matt Woodley on their staff is a longtime Tony Bennett disciple. It's not a surprise they have their defense in order. But offense is going to win games at this level now with the amount of talent that's being spread around. A huge, huge upcoming 2 weeks, I think, for Wake Forest.
Mike, real quick on that point guard issue, and then if Mike wants to chime in from the athletic director point of view on that other issue, just between, what kind of conversations are Steve Forbes and John Curry having at Wake Forest at midseason? I've known some ADs that leave their coach alone until close to the end of the season. I've known other ADs that say we have conversations every day about the expectation and all that. But the quick PS on the point guard issue, when you look at the 4 best position teams in the ACC right now, Pitt has a sophomore point guard, Jalen Lowe, that is one of the best players in this league, period. He's only a sophomore, but he's exactly the kind of guy that can make the engine go. Clemson has 2 point guards on the floor at all times. Chase Hunter's in his 5th year. Jaden Zachary is a Boston College transfer who was a 3-year starter. I believe he's in his 4th year starting at the college level. Yeah. So Brad Brownell's got 2 of those brainiacs that coach is describing on the floor much of the time together. Carolina, of course, has Elliot Cadeau, who has his faults, but is insanely creative and very smart most of the time and a wonderful ball handler. So 3 of the top 4 ACC teams have exactly what you want at point guard. And that's why I was surprised by Steve Forbes' answer, guards are guards. Well, take a look at their assist turnover ratio. Hunter Salas and Cameron Hildreth and Tyler Johnson. None of them have a 2-to-1 ratio, much less what you love to see. And some of the best point guards in this league have 3-to-1 or better. Duke is different. They're handling point guard in a very unconventional way this year. Believe it or not, Cooper Flagg, their 6'9" guy, leads the team in assists. So they're not doing the traditional point guard thing. But the Blue Devils have so much talent, it might not matter. Wake is really getting hurt for now by that guards are guards approach. And maybe they can figure it out. But for now, those pieces are not fitting together in a healthy, productive, efficient way.
As far as the AD and the head coach talking, and Kerry, I'll go to you. Man, when I didn't talk to my coach, that meant that I'd pretty much moved on. And but it also differs. I mean, when I had Pat Kennedy as my head coach at Towson, I wasn't talking to Pat a lot because I knew he was gone at the end of the year. When I had Pat Scarry as my coach, who I hired away from Pitt, I talk to Pat every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. Sometimes it's just the relationships that you have going, but I mean, they know what their metrics are, and they had to know what the metrics were. No matter who the coach is, you know what your metrics are heading into the season. I don't know a lot of guys who are, just out of the blue flipping the entire grading system on a coach. What's your experience been?
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that. I mean, as a head coach, you have to, and even more so now than before, have a ongoing daily relationship with your athletic director. You have to, especially at a school that is basketball driven, if you will. But even if it's a football school, a high level school, you still have to have that. I mean, I grew up with an athletic director with my father, and I remember he taught me that lesson every day before he left the office. Every day, no matter what. He stopped into PJ's office. What do you need? Did something come up today? Because I don't know. I'm running these other 15 sports. Did anything come up today? What do you need? I'm here to help you. What do you need? And you have to have that relationship. And, my dad saved PJ's job twice, and he wasn't going to go any other way because he knew where PJ stood. Now you look at a guy like John, young AD, somewhat dynamic, bit at high levels, trying to really make something of this. And I'm sure he sits there and thinks, how are we going to survive the aforementioned issues we just talked about, right? This financial burden that's going to come down on a private school in a basketball-centric place, neighboring the wealth of talent in the SEC right now, where he's been. Steve is one of those guys that's very well respected in the coaching community and can coach and has proven that he can coach. It's going to be interesting to see, and we won't know until we directly ask the question or you get the answer given to you. If they're not talking about this right now, how they're going to make that transition, assuming that they don't make the tournament this year, given what's up on the wall right now. Obviously, if they do, you're back in that same position where it'll take a really, really bold AD to say he's not going to be our coach next year. Or the AD realizes this is short term and that extension really isn't an extension. And I'm going to hit the transfer portal and go someplace else and give myself a new life someplace. There's more of an opportunity to do that than ever before if you're Steve Forbes. You just never really know. But the results will speak for themselves. And I think the results will start to speak this month if there's more rumblings about that in Winston-Salem. If all of a sudden these next 5 games turn into 1-4 and now it's like, oh man, then you got players and now you're starting to talk about where are we going now? And the portal's opening up here. Like, there's just so many extenuating factors. But look at the 5 years and the extenuating factors that he's had to deal with. Obviously, everyone dealt with COVID and the transfer portal, and then the 6th year, and then the rich staying richer when a place like Carolina can pick up Brady Manick and keep the big kid, Baycott, right? Like, what do you do? Like, you throw your hands up at Wake. You're like, it's just, we're just going to try to fight for that next position. They have to be talking every day, one way or the other. And I think if you're Steve, I think you have to take a more, and I think John is of that ilk that he'll appreciate the proactivity on Steve's part, one way or the other, knowing both of them. And I worked with John at Tennessee for a little bit. And obviously my dad was at Kansas when he was at Kansas State. I visited Wake a few times to go over and say hello. And I feel like he'd appreciate Steve coming to him and initiating that to take some of that pressure off, because you don't want that uncomfortable feeling when you see each other in the hallway, let alone at the games. And you don't want to be looking over your shoulder to see if the AD and who he's sitting with and what he's doing. So I can't, maybe I'm overemphasizing it just from face value on the outside looking in, having not watched all 15 or 16 of the games. I think this 2 weeks is monumental for Steve and Wake Forest and how they approach it and what the results are.
I'll tell you one thing, Kerry, you got me laughing right there because I'm going to paint with a broad brush right here, but coaches being proactive and trying to develop a relationship with their AD, that is a needle in the haystack, brother, because most coaches I know, when they start to lose, they retreat, they hibernate, they are going away. They're looking to avoid. Pat didn't want to see me because he knew, at some point, but That is a big discussion point. And for Wake Forest, let's get now quick 10-second answers. David Glenn, does Wake Forest make the NCAA tournament?
I'll say this. When I look at that soft midsection of the ACC and we try to imagine circumstances where one of those half dozen in the middle kind of rises to the occasion, puts together a really good regular season ACC record, I think the Demon Deacons are the best candidate from that midsection because of Hunter Salas, because of the other personnel we described. I even think because of Steve Forbes. They like him. They believe in him. John Curry wants this relationship to work. There's no doubt about that. Steve Forbes is incredibly well-liked, and everybody wants him to succeed. I think they have a chance to do it as long as they steal one of those big games Coach Keating was talking about, at least one of the big ones, and then beat the lesser opponents, Miami, Virginia Tech, etc. Then you got a little wave to ride. That was a little more than 10 seconds, but that was as short as I could give you.
What do you think,
I think no bad losses and at least one, if not two, really good wins. Duke, Carolina, maybe Pittsburgh stays as a good win. You've got to steal some of those quad ones early in your league, and they're few and far between right now, but you cannot have any bad losses. If you don't, I think Wake probably fills that Seth Greenberg role to the positive side and sneaks himself in so Steve doesn't have to put himself all over the media to claim why they're not in. I think they do make it in the end if they take care of business.
I am a better person and a more effective business owner for having known and learned from Emily Parks over many years now. Emily's company, Organize for Success, helps multi-passionate business owners and executives bring harmony to all the layers of their lives, from work to side projects, from friends and family to hobbies, community, and beyond. With Emily's help, you too can make every minute matter. She helps you determine what earns your time and how to efficiently accomplish what matters. One of the many things I love about Emily is that she does not impose her will on her clients. She listens to them. That way she can better help them cultivate the lives they want to live. You can set up a complimentary call with Emily today by visiting organizeforsuccess.com. King Neptune Restaurant in Wrightsville Beach is the longest running restaurant in New Hanover County. That's since 1947. And it recently was renovated to an impeccable degree by our good friends Jimmy Galeese and his amazing wife, Keating. Their outstanding chefs offer fresh local seafood, salad options, and creative, tasty variations of pork, beef, and poultry dishes. King Neptune has always been a great choice for dinner and or drinks, and now it's open for lunch and brunch too. Check out the lunch, brunch, and dinner menus at neptuneswb.com. That's Neptunes with an S, then WB for Wrightsville Beach. Again, the King Neptune Restaurant website is neptuneswb.com.
It was last March when NC State went on a big run and made it all the way to the Final Four, ending almost 4 decades of futility over in Raleigh. But now it looks like Kevin Keats' Wolfpack has a little bit of a hangover. The Wolfpack right now 8-6 overall, guys, 1-2 in the ACC. They've lost their last 2, and they are 0-3 in quad 1 games. David, it doesn't look good for Kevin Keats. In our first episode of Time Out, we talked about, was that Final Four run for the Wolfpack a fluke? We agreed that pretty much it was. If you're Boo Corrigan right now, how much of a focus do you have on trying to help Kevin Keats get better? Because you know he's not going to make a move on him, or you wouldn't think he would at the end of this season.
Well, there's a couple things there. And one, I'm intrigued to hear Coach Keating's opinion about how Kevin Keats won at UNC Wilmington, which was with a lot of quick, athletic, attacking guards in a league where you don't deal with a lot of quality big men. And he really won that way. Regular season titles, trips to the NCAA tournament, et cetera, before he was hired at NC State. Some people are skeptical that you can take the same way he won there at UNC Wilmington and win at NC State. So I would love Coach's thoughts on that. But in terms of the cashing in question, and we're all skeptical about this year's NC State team. It's not that it's a bad Wolfpack team. It's that They don't have anybody I would describe as one of the best players in the league. I think Pitt's going to make the NCAA tournament. They have one of the best players in the league in Jalen Lowe. We all know Duke's going to make it. They have a couple of the best players in the league, starting with Cooper Flagg, of course. Carolina, I still think is a really good team. I know their record is ugly because of a tough schedule in part, but they still have R.J. Davis. They still have Ian Jackson, one of the best freshmen in this league. When healthy, they still have Seth Trimble, who I think has elevated his game to an all-ACC level. Same with Clemson. Chase Hunter's a quality veteran guard. Ian Shefflin's a quality veteran big man. They're all-ACC candidates when you think of that 15-man all-ACC team. I bring those guys up because at Pitt and Carolina and Duke and Clemson, probable NCAA tournament teams are definite ones. They're riding the shoulders of that combination of talent and experience. We could all have different opinions of who the best player on NC State is right now, but we might throw out three different players, right? Is it Marcus Hill, the transfer from the Mid-American Conference, who's a good scorer but doesn't help in a lot of other ways? Is it Dontrez Styles, the Georgetown transfer? Is it Ben Middlebrooks, the big man? I don't see an elite player on this NC State roster. And when you win an ACC title and you go to a Final Four, you would think that magic. Kevin Keats told us on the David Glenn show that he could already sense the rising interest in Wolfpack basketball, doors that were open, that were previously closed because of that March Madness run. They cashed in with some nice players, but I don't think they cashed in with all ACC players. And eventually, you need some dudes if you're going to be an NCAA tournament team. And they have a whole bunch of good players and probably not a single great player.
I think about the transfer portal and the two ends of the spectrum as to why kids would leave seemingly higher levels for the high level. And to me, you have the middling player on a high-level team that may not be able to crack through at his current school, but can contribute at, let's say, an SEC school, pick one of 13 this year, and potentially win a national championship. In between now, take success at, he went to NC State as an example. Now he's going to Kentucky. We can throw him a little bit of money because he has that perceived market value, which is not set. It's just an open-end spectrum right now. Look at NC State's top 6 players. Hill, Bowling Green, Taylor, Butler, Styles, you mentioned Georgetown, Middlebrooks, Clemson, Huntley Hatfield, Louisville, O'Connell, although pre-really madness, Stanford. They're all transfers, but not transfers that were like going to come in and impact your team and elevate your team. To your point, I think it's a fair statement. They're nice players, they're nice pieces. Go back to the guards that Kevin had at Wilmington. When I first got here 4 years ago and went to watch them play, I think it was Joyner and I can't remember the other guard that they had. And it was like, I was like, holy crap. These guys are just coming out and letting it rip. When your best player transfers from a lower level and elevates his play and your team's play to be the best player on the team, DJ Burns, now you mix in with some of the other pieces and State has their run. Where State's at right now is failure would be a strong word right now. But if you're going to live in that portal, if you're going to become that team in this league, you have to really either have a pretty deep pocketbook to go get a guy away from going to where he can be second or third for $100,000, just making numbers up. Or you have to have a cadre of most likely guards, if not one really good young big, that bigs always mature late, are at the core of your team and they stay there. You have to go 7 guys down the roster before you find someone who's been in NC State for 4 years. Kevin's always known and been, ever since I remember working with him when he coached at Hargrave. He's a player's guy. He relates tremendously with the kids. And I'm not one to criticize coaching acumen because everyone's there for a reason. But you got to do something a little bit different nowadays with these guys. And to your point, David, having buttered your bread at a lower level with really quick, dynamic, athletic guards, They kind of had that in the early stages. They found the right guys early on. They were in this purgatory of like, are we going to, football's got the whole thing. We're going to pay everybody $25,000. There was just a mess of things going on at State. They benefited from getting a guy who comes from Winthrop and all of a sudden becomes, whoo, this guy is transformational. I mean, yeah, O'Connell hit the shot, but DJ Burns was that guy. And they don't have that guy. They don't have that guy that's that dynamic or have yet to go find the high-value free agent target in the portal that can take a pretty decent roster. And then we need a guy. Look at their averages. Yeah, it's nice they got 5 guys averaging between 9 and 12. They need a guy averaging 20. They need a guy averaging 20 and 8, 20 and 10, 20 and 7 assists, 2-to-1 assist turnover ratio. I don't know if this carries over into next year, but it's, to me, solely the reason why they're not really going to go anywhere this year because of their roster makeup.
And you know what's crazy, Mike, real quick? The Wolfpack was 10th in the ACC last year before they won the ACC tournament. They might be 10th in the ACC again this year. So it might be the same in most ways. Just that incredible ending was related to the elevated play of DJ Burns inside, the elevated play of DJ Horn outside. Those 2 transfers were far more impactful than anything you could say about Marcus Hill or Ben Middlebrooks or Brandon Huntley Hatfield or any of this year's guys.
So the verdict on NC State, fellas, postseason or not?
I could give you that in 1 second. No.
Depends on what kind of postseason you're talking about.
I was going to say, are they going to go by?
Here comes this guy for a guy who's like,
I
we won the
interpreted
CIT, we won the CBI. Like, I don't know, I didn't flush it at State, but different day.
Hey, coach has won 2 postseason tournaments.
Hey, I'm undefeated in the postseason.
That's right. He has never lost.
Never lost in the postseason.
Never lost a post-conference postseason game. That's incredible. In sports, we talk a lot about impact players who make a positive difference. When it comes to our state's economy, the North Carolina pork industry is a true MVP. Each year, the pork industry plays an important role in supporting rural communities across our state. It contributes more than $10 billion a year to the North Carolina economy and supports more than 44,000 jobs. Learn more about their positive impact at ncpork.org. The North Carolina Pork Council, the foundational partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. The Lawson Insurance Group in Raleigh is a family-owned business led by 3 actual brothers who happen to be huge sports fans: Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. I know these guys, I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring that North Carolinians and their businesses are prepared for life's inevitable challenges, with the reminder that as a high street insurance partner, Lawson Insurance Group offers local expertise and support that, combined with High Street's extensive national resources, means more choice and support for you as their client. To learn more, search Lawson Insurance Group online. The Lawson Insurance website will be the first link that pops up.
Let's talk about North Carolina. The Tar Heels made it back to the NCAA tournament last year after missing it the year before. The Heels right now playing one of the toughest schedules in America, 9-6 overall, 2-1 in the ACC. They've won their last 2 games, including that unbelievable, improbable game at Notre Dame on Saturday with a 4-point play by the aforementioned Elliot Cadeau. Carolina 1-6, though, in the quad 1 games. You can play a tough schedule, but Kerry, don't you have to win the games too?
Yeah, I mean, the schedule kind of dictates itself depending on what those schools do after you schedule them. I remember being at a mid-major school trying to get by games. You can appreciate this, Mike. Calipari was always a guy who thought he had everything figured out before everyone figured it out. And I said, well, we'll play you and you pay us a base fee of $75,000. And then let's go to the RPI. At the time it was RPI. And if we're in the top 150, tack on another 25. If we're in the top 100, tack on another 25. We're in the top 50, double it, because all we're doing is helping you out. So I really thought that dynamic pricing model was something that would have taken, and it might actually happen now. But to your point, Mike, all those rankings kind of sort themselves out based on who's winning the games. It's like this whole data analytics era that we're in right now. Like you can run all your decisions based on analytics, but the reason why the analytics are what they are is because the decisions you're making are already the right decisions to justify it's like the Spider-Man meme, they're pointing at each other. So yeah, I mean, you if you're Carolina, your margin of error is shrinking, and you can't you're dang lucky you won that game. And again, road games always carry a little bit of weight, but that was an unbelievable win at Notre Dame. I mean, basically just stole it. And to be honest with you, one more second, and we're talking about a different outcome. It was pretty close that they still almost gave it up in the end. But that could be something that could springboard them into a run where they need to be Carolina. We talked about this last week. Their lack of a big, they're kind of the same across the board. RJ is struggling because he doesn't have that big to kind of defend him and or protect him. I should not defend him, but protect him and be someone to take some pressure off of him. And you still have a lot of younger guys. Ian Jackson, obviously, we talked about Cadeau. These are still younger guys trying to find their way. Talented players in their own right, but it's a different time there right now, and they're all trying to make that adjustment and going on the heels, no pun intended, of where they've been and where they're expected to be. This is obviously a precarious time, and they have to start winning some games. They don't have it, and they have about a little margin for error, as we talked about before with Wake, but in a different way. They could find themselves in that proverbial we should be in the tournament spot at the end of the year too, which is what you don't want to be in. You either want to be in or you just want to be out so you can figure it out and start working on it next year.
My take with Carolina begins with this. If the Tar Heels had scheduled 4 cupcakes instead of at Kansas, Auburn, Alabama, and Florida, which I believe those 4 opponents might be among the dozen best teams in America. I don't think that's an exaggeration. If the Tar Heels had 4 cupcakes instead of those 4, they'd be 13-2, and most of this conversation would be right out the door. P.S. to that, Hubert Davis is under fire from a lot of people. I would just say this in his defense. My attorney background always leads me to look at evidence. I know Hubert Davis. I was 21 when he was probably 19, so I go back that far personally with Hubert Davis. I have an affection for him, a respect for him. But if the evidence didn't suggest he was a good coach, I would not be afraid to say that out loud. But what we know about the evidence is the guy's already taken the Tar Heels to a national championship game. What we know about the evidence is the guy's already taken the Tar Heels to 2 huge wins over maybe the greatest of all time, Mike Krzyzewski, at the end of Coach K's career when Coach K had really good teams. You can't be a bad coach and do those things. You can't. And if you're a bad coach, you don't win an ACC regular season. Remember, Hubert Davis already has a regular season title. Now, I'm not saying the guy doesn't deserve hard questions and some criticism. Should the Heels be better? Should the chemistry be better? Should you ever get caught at the University of North Carolina without a high caliber big man? No. He has the answer for that. That is a fair criticism. Literally for a half century. This is not an exaggeration. I have the data to back it up. There's never been in 50 years a Carolina team without a big man who could average double digits scoring. Never. That is, the word never is misused widely. Never in a half century, I'll say, not like since the 1800s. Never in a half, since the Dean Smith era started, let's say, in the 1960s. Carolina's never had a roster without a high caliber big man, and it just doesn't have it this year. And that's messing up the chemistry in ways that Coach Keating could talk about how it's less complicated to prepare for the Tar Heels. It's easier to defend RJ Davis without getting, the snot beat out of you because you put too much pressure on the perimeter, and Baycott ends up with 30 and 18 because you extended your defense. But, everything is different when it comes to those X's and O's this year. RJ Davis didn't forget how to be a good basketball player, right? Like the guy shot roughly 40% from three-point land last year. There's a lot of reasons for that. RJ's the same guy, but the chemistry around him is different. The personnel around him is different. The inside-outside balance is insanely different. And the Tar Heels are going to be walking that fine line that Coach was just talking about, rather than just beating the brains out of some of their opponents. They stole a win at Notre Dame, right? But I think when you have, put it this way, if it was playground style, and all three of us got to just look at all the players in the ACC and just start picking dudes, eventually, pretty quickly, Seth Trimble, R.J. Davis, Elliot Cadeau, Drake Powell, Ian Jackson, they're going to be picked early. However, there's no center in that five. There's no power forward in that five. And that makes building a modern-day functional team rather than a playground team a lot more complicated.
And there it is, because I've been waiting to say this for a while. I wanted to get to the Carolina section. But in our opening segment of Time Out today, Kerry came back and was talking about how Duke is set up off the court and how they brought in people with a strong basketball background, with an NBA mindset, and they are using their resources in a smart, efficient, and proactive way. Wake Forest hasn't done that. NC State hasn't done that. And it's almost negligent how North Carolina's staff is pretty much, it's all predicated on where they went to school. So that closes out a lot of talent right there, and a lot of, myopic thinking, to go back again to week one with you, Kerry, and what you talked about the Carolina program. But if you're not set up to do what you need to do, it's going to be a challenge. And this personnel issue with the lack of a big, Carolina also, and this will be, there are very few people that will believe me, but believe me when I tell you, I know this to be the truth. North Carolina basketball is excessively efficient. That's another way of saying they're cheap. They've always been cheap. They've been very slow to engage into new ways of thinking and doing things, new technologies, this and that and the other. And it just feels like when I watch that program off the court, on the court, they are in a sclerotic state. Hubert Davis is not a prototypical head coach. He is a very good coach, but he's not the guy that you would say, man, that's the guy that should be the head coach of one of the top 5 programs in the nation. He would not have gotten a job at Kentucky or Duke or a UCLA or any of those other big programs. He got the job because he was a Carolina guy. You wonder now, what with all of the Carolina guys, Kerry, you've worked with them, David, you've known them for 40 years. Why the incredible depth of talent of basketball minds around North Carolina basketball alumni are not more directly involved on a daily basis? And if they are, they're not telling anybody about it. And I think that would be very attractive when you're trying to get some of those guys in the portal. Hey, if you're a big, come get mentored by Rasheed Wallace. I love Rasheed Wallace. I remember Dean Smith saying during a commercial break one time during his Carolina Blue Line show, David, that Rasheed Wallace and Anton Jameson were the best 2 players that he ever coached that were bigs. And that's a hell of a statement from Dean Smith. But they were also great guys. Why are they not around the program? Instead, I've got Sean May, who is not a big guy. He's a big guy. But that is not the guy that you want teaching your post players. And right now, there is no Bill Guthridge walking through that door, the big man whisperer. I don't know.
So,
that to me
Mike,
is a real challenge for them.
Let me throw the coaching hat on here, and David mentioned this too. And I think there's parallels here. Hubert made it a point to make some tweaks to how they play. David's point, never. Well, here's the never. Along with the never, they've never not run basic series, which I'll rudimentally explain without a whiteboard yet. Maybe we'll have to add that feature for future. And they've never not run secondary break. The reason why the bigs worked at Carolina is because every time they came down the floor, without hesitation, no matter what they were doing, the ball would get reversed through the top of the key, through the trailing big, and the first thing you do would look into the other big who ran to the rim first. That's efficiency at its finest. Then when the ball got reversed, that ball side guard, not the point guard, would be following that big as he went across the lane, set a back screen on the other big to go to the rim, and they get lob dunks. Now you have the athleticism of the Antoine Jamesons and the Rasheed Wallace. Like, oh my God, towering alley-oop dunks coming most likely from a 6'6" man who could see over the top of that and deliver that pass. If that didn't happen, the guard steps out, and now the two bigs engage in screens with each other, and it's unstoppable. One of those two guys is getting a duck in, and now you have, and this was the beauty, Mike, you mentioned working for a Carolina guy. I'll never forget one of my favorite times of coaching when I was with Buzz Peterson, Carolina grad, of course. We ran Carolina system. That's what Buzz knew. He wasn't screwing that up. He won at App State, won at Tulsa. I'm in the Garden, my home joint, playing Alabama in the finals of the NIT, and we're running secondary, and he's letting me kind of toy with this, and I'm on the bench, and I'm like, hey, who wants to run a new set in secondary? We had all our Roy Williams stuff for Paul Pierce. We had like 15 derivatives out of secondary break. We had good big guys at those places, right? So you go to Carolina now, the adjustment that they made, yeah, we can go through all the other things, the ancillary things in the portal and transfers. But there's no place right now for what they're doing. And the basic series was, okay, now we're in half court. We're going to be in a box set. The two bigs are going to be up high. We're going to pop them out where they can get catches because no one's going to pressure them out there. And then we're going to have some exchange opposite that's going to result in one of the guards, as the ball gets reversed, back screening for the initial big to cut to the basket. And the first look, go inside. Well, here's where the guards benefit. The other big now becomes a screener. There are no screeners on Carolina's team right now. There's athletes, there's slashers, there's cutters, there's scorers. Yeah, you can have a big that can space the floor a la the Warriors in the post, not to post somebody up, but throw the ball in there for spacing purposes, which is an unheralded thing now. No one does that anymore, but it's successful. Or you can use those guys as screeners. No one's going to get recruited out of the portal to come be a screener at Carolina. I don't care how much you're paying me. I'll give you $1 million to be the 5-man at Carolina and set screens for RJ Davis and Elliot Cadeau this year. I'll sign me up for that. I'll do it. I appreciate that. But these kids don't get that. And there's the chasm that's starting to come. Coach Smith, rest in peace. Coach Williams is around at the games. His name's on the court. People know him. But now, what year is this with Hubert now? I mean, is it 4 or 5? Like now we're starting. Okay, now this is. I wonder, David, if you can't do it in the middle of the season because you don't have the personnel. If their off season is, okay, we tried this. We had a few. I remember going to the practice early on. They had a transfer from Marquette.
Dawson Garcia.
And I'm telling you right now, every other word out of Hubert's mouth, yeah, Dawson, yeah, Dawson. It was, and I'm like, this guy must be like exactly. Never saw him on the court. I don't even know if he finished that year he was there. Like, he did ghost. If you went to practice in October, which I did, you'd think, oh, this is the guy. Now, Manic became that guy for them the next year, and obviously the run happened when you had Love and you have RJ and you have Baycott. You got pieces. I wonder if they actually don't say, okay, we tried it, and while we still can, because it's not going to be a house cleaning necessarily, either from the top or internally. And I don't know, Mike, if they'll look. I'll self-promote shamelessly here. I'm as much of a Carolina guy as anybody, but I didn't go to school at Carolina. But I can tell you right now, you drop me in that office right now, I know exactly what they're talking about and everything that they're talking about, having spent all that time with Buzz and carrying a photo of what I did. If they don't go back to, we really need to go get one or two really good bigs. If you're asking me, here's my consulting plan for Carolina. Go find and develop prep school or reclassified or a good high school big or two, sell them on being the next Baycott, only in the sense of being here for 4 or 5 years, maybe 6. I'll tell you where Carolina can benefit. Develop a relationship, what's coming up with a junior college or community college. Put some of these kids in there for 2 years, get them back for 4 years, and watch what happens to that kid when he's the big kid at Carolina 6 years from now as a 24-year-old, getting paid, having all of his expenses done, and a local homegrown, whether it's regional or state. If you ask me, that guy is there somewhere. And you got to really have a vision to sell him on that. And I got news for you. By the time that happens in 6 years, someone in the NBA, in the cyclical nature of how basketball works, will eventually go back to realizing we need to have a big guy in our program again, and that'll be a spot for them in the first or second round of the draft. Basketball has always worked that way. It may sound easy for me because I'm not worried about wins or losses, but I feel like I have a pretty decent handle on seeing this and where it's gone. And you've got guys that respect that and understand that. There's not a guy on that staff that doesn't know what secondary break or B1 or B2 or B3 is. Not a single one. They know what T game is against the zone. They know it. There's a reason why Coach Smith and Coach Williams did what they did. Sometimes if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You took a shot. You got really good shot. National championship, Final Four. Maybe it's time to go back. Maybe. I don't know. I'll be really, really interested to see how their offseason goes.
Mike, real quick, you asked that great broad question, and it's one of your favorites about Carolina's reluctance to look at that broader horizon, non-Carolina people, different ways of looking at things. We don't have enough time to dive all the way into that rabbit hole today, but I'll just say this quickly. On the upside, amidst some sky is falling conversations about the Tar Heels, you also have to give Hubert Davis and his staff credit for finding, signing, and developing Ian Jackson and Drake Powell. Mm-hmm. Oh. So if you're making a list of what you think might be wrong with Carolina basketball, in air quotes, let's not be blind to the fact that literally every program in America would love to make a habit of having two guys like that in their freshman class on a consistent basis. So let's give them credit for that. The other point, just to follow on what Coach said, you have to treat, if you like to play basketball the way North Carolina likes to play basketball, you simply must treat the transfer portal the way football coaches now treat the position of quarterback. Mm-hmm. There is nobody who goes into a new college football season without a starting quarterback that they believe can take them where they want to go. If it makes Hubert uncomfortable to incorporate name, image, likeness money to find that big man, he's got to get over himself. He's got to get over the idea that the world should still work the way it did when Dean Smith recruited him in the 1980s. Like, those days are over. And just like you will get fired in college football, if you do not every single year make sure you have a quarterback you trust and a backup you can live with at that most important position on the football field, if you want to play the way Carolina plays, others can get away without an elite big man. Carolina can't, unless they even more dramatically change the Carolina way than Coach just outlined earlier, the things that they don't do as much of or at all anymore. It is drowning this season, the lack of that quarterback type presence in the post. And that's just something that Hubert Davis and his staff, great or bad or in between, you can't solve personnel issues at midseason. This is not the NBA. You got what you got. And that means a lot of talent in the backcourt, maybe as much as almost anybody in America. I still think the Heels are going to finish in the top 3 or 4 of the standings in the ACC. I still think they're going to be an NCAA tournament team, but they're going to be riding that roller coaster because of that donut in the post.
Kerry, do you think the Heels make the postseason? NCAA?
I do. I think on top of what David said, they're good enough and talented enough at spots in the bigger scheme of things to make it. Where that lands them in terms of favorable seeding, you never really know. But obviously, given the overriding factor of what's happening in the region, it's going to be tough to get into that top 4 seeding anyway. I think they'll be happy to do that. And, you have good guards and shots can go in. They can make a little bit of a run, maybe win 2, find themselves in the second weekend. But, yeah, I think we'll eventually find the Tar Heels in postseason this year.
If you are anywhere near Wilmington, North Carolina, and looking for a little live music, a cold beer, a tangy slushie, a fun crowd, or just a taste of the good life at the beach, Jimmy's Bar in Wrightsville Beach is the place for you. Located on North Lumina Avenue, just 1 block from the sand and waves of the Atlantic Ocean, Jimmy's features a full bar with nightly beer and drink specials, and it hosts musical performers almost every day of the year. One more fun fact, Jimmy's annual Children's Bike Drive, which started in 2017, now distributes more than 1,000 bicycles and helmets per year to young people in the Wilmington area and beyond. Jimmy's Bar, your home away from home on Lumina Avenue in Wrightsville Beach.
This segment brought to you by our great friends at Atlantic Tire and Service, where DG and his family take all of their vehicles for routine maintenance, service needs, and a world-class selection of new tires. Atlantic Tire and Service, your one-stop tire and auto repair provider with highly trained technicians and a sales and support staff that are second to none. They've grown to 6 Triangle area locations, 2 in Raleigh, 2 in Cary, 1 in Durham, and 1 in Wake Forest. You can learn more online at AtlanticTireOnline.com.
So we talked about Wake Forest. We talked about NC State. We talked about UNC. Now it's on to the team that everybody thought was going to be the best in the Atlantic Coast Conference in this 24-25 season. We're talking, of course, about Jon Scheyer's Duke Blue Devils. This team is loaded with talent, maybe too much talent at times, maybe competing talent, but this team is pretty good. 12-2 overall. They are 4-0, already a lot of conference games under their belt. They are a strong basketball team that is looking to just keep pushing on. 4-2 in quad one games. 2 tough losses, but they've learned from that. Right now, David Glenn, Jon Scheyer has a lot of work to do, but it's fun work because his team is winning. They're just trying to enhance.
Yeah, Mike, and I'm going to leave most, as they say in Congress, I'll leave most of my time here on the floor to the gentleman from originally New Jersey, meaning Coach Keating. And my coach style question for him is, how do you manage asking, for example, Tyrese Proctor, who was no doubt about it the starting point guard at Duke last year with astronomical assist numbers? How do you in the offseason go to him and say, you're not really our functional starting point guard anymore? How do you sign Caleb Foster that Mike, you and I talked to in Charlotte at ACC Media Day? How do you start the season with him at the point guard and then in the early season essentially demote him and say you're not really our functional point guard anymore? The Tulane transfer, Sion James, is not really a point guard, but he's going to be that for us. And then Cooper Flagg's going to be this point forward who leads the team in assists. As much as I endorse everything you just described about Duke, they are one of the best teams in the nation. They have one of the best freshman classes, and it's not just in the rankings like it is showing up on the court in the form of Cooper Flagg and Con Knipple and the big guy, Kamen Malowich. There's everything you'd want in terms of that blend of talent, experience, depth. But even on good teams, Steve Logan, the football coach, would often say, even when you're winning, you have problems sometimes. And at Duke, I saw last year that there was not great chemistry in their locker room, with Kyle Filipowski being such a strange guy and his older girlfriend and his detachment from the team. And I'm serious, that messed with their chemistry. And you could see it at the end of the season on the court. They just did not look at him the same way they looked at their others. This year's different, but everybody has an individual agenda. We've all heard the saying, it's amazing what you can accomplish when no one cares about who gets the credit. But Coach Keating would know as well as anyone, even when you win, somebody's concerned that he's not getting enough minutes, not getting enough touches, not doing the role he thought he was going to do, and that messes with their long-term plans for their professional future. Just because I agree how good Duke is, and I'll leave my other thoughts about the Blue Devils for our next show, I want to hear Coach Keating's thoughts about even managing those challenges, even while you have a record that you mostly like and analytics that you mostly like.
I think John's ability and the Duke administration ability to get Rachel Baker in place before all this is now paying huge dividends. John doesn't worry about any of those things. I tell you one thing that even from a peripheral, you really don't hear, or I haven't dug into, and David, maybe you're more privy to this than I am, is how much each.
Oops.
How
much each? Start back from there.
Yep. I think one thing that you don't hear a lot about with the Duke players is how much each of them are making in the market right now. I mean, last year at this time and the year before, it was Baycot's getting $1 million. RJ's going to get $2 million this year. I don't hear any of that noise here locally, even from alums or people that are passive fans. Like, oh, Cooper Flag, he's making 2.5 this year. Like Knippel's getting 40,000 for every time he hits 7-3. Like there's no dynamic of the outside noise that affects inside basketball now. And I'm telling you, John, don't even worry about that. You can just tell in his demeanor, and this is a coach looking at a coach. You don't see the stress of NIL on John's face at all. And maybe Rachel Seton Hall. I've known Rachel Baker since she was a little girl. I mean, Rod Baker was her father was one of our assistant coaches at Seton Hall. Like, she came up the ranks, did a great job in the youth scene at Nike, and that relationship helped get her that spot. I think she's the unsung hero of why John's able to manage this roster properly. You mentioned this last week, the Tulane transfer, James. He's the perfect Batman or Robin to this team's Batman. Here's a fifth-year guy from Tulane, 14 points a year, built like a you-know-what house, and he's a guy that can pick up the slack for you because he's been there and done that, and he's a man. And now he's playing with the best player who's still a boy. Super talented. Only flaw is that he's not really shooting the ball that well from deep, but he's now becoming this point forward, and that he's so talented and gifted, and Flag can be that type of personality, be that type of guy. They have the talent. And I think the caveat in all this, to be honest with you, is it's easier now for John to pull these guys in from a basketball standpoint and his staff and say, hey, guys, we're trying to win a national championship now. We've removed all the noise. You are not going to have any of those players, whether it's by instruction or just by nature, going to any coach or anyone on the staff, the basketball staff, hey, my car lease is coming up. Is my money coming in? Like, hey, Leonard, hey, Coach Hamilton, where's that 250 you promised me? I mean, like, it's kind of sounds elementary, but I'm telling you, it has everything to do with why Duke is having this success as their talent, and their talent is able to be what it is. Now, nothing's perfect, and I'm sure they have their own issues, but again, John just didn't go to the game at SMU because of an illness. They beat the top half of the team in the SMUs 11-2 by 25. The talent is there. It's meshing well. It's accepted younger kids. You've got the guys that have been in the program that are kind of accepting their role. Role acceptance now is at a higher level of importance than ever before. And David, you mentioned Coach Wooden's, statement. The only thing I had up on the wall, coincidentally enough, in my locker room. It's amazing what gets accomplished and no one cares who gets the credit. This team is a microcosm of that in this day and age more than any other. Look, let's not forget about Auburn had a kid who basically just quit on the team during a game last week or last month. Now they're talking about how they're going to run roughshod and go right to the national championship a month later. So everybody deals with it differently, right? But in the case of Duke, the way they're dealing with it, that success and the fact that they're a very good and maybe underrated at this point because of their offensive firepower, they're a very good defensive team. Their length, their strength, their ability to defend is going to catch. Defense will travel. Defense will be the deciding factor where they can win 4 games and get to the Final Four in April.
Mike, my quick PS there, and then I'll let you wrap it up. Number one, Jon Scheyer was a little skeptical of the transfer portal when it started. He was a little Dabo Sweeney-ish when it came to the volume and necessity of transfers. To his credit, and this is kind of like your point, Mike, about Carolina sometimes closing in on itself with its way being the only way. Jon Scheyer quickly pivoted from skepticism towards the transfer portal to basically saying, we can still be Duke and recruit the #1 high school class in the nation, but then supplement it with unselfish, why wouldn't Sion James want to be a secondary player on a possible national champion rather than averaging 20 in obscurity at Tulane, right? But you have to find that guy. You got to communicate with that guy. You got to make sure he's coming in with the right expectations. So it's Sion James in his role, and it's Mason Gillis in his role. And Duke fell in love with Malik Brown of Syracuse just by watching him on tape while preparing for a conference opponent. And, of course, playing against him and seeing how he rebounds and defends and is unselfish and high field goal percentage. Just fell in love with him. Get him out of. So now you got 3 of your top 8 or whatever are these unselfish, I know who I am type guy. And then I just had to squeeze in. I don't know how often this is. Coach Keating might have references off the top of his head. I'm sure we're going to see a lot of TV graphics along these lines. But in almost 40 years of covering college basketball, I cannot think of many people who led their team in points and rebounds and assists and steals and blocked shots. Mm-hmm. The same guy on the single team. Now, he may not hold on all 5 of those because a couple are close. But Cooper Flagg of Duke right now is leading in all 5 of those categories. Some teams have 5 different guys leading in those 5 categories. He's not a perfect player, as Coach said. He's still not a well-rounded perimeter shooter, et cetera. But, man, this is why Coach K raved about Cooper Flagg in the on the court, off the court, leadership, passion, intensity, toughness, intangibles, but also, wow, what a skill set. I guess we'll see names of others who went 5 for 5, but wow, I can't think of anybody. And I'm sure they're out there, but I look forward to seeing those TV graphics because I'm fascinated to know who else is on that list.
So does Duke make the Final Four, guys? We know they're going to make the tournament. We don't have to go through the Wake State Carolina thing right there. Duke's going to the field of 68. How deep do they go?
I like Duke to be the only non-SEC team to really have a legit shot. I mean, I think season ends today, prognosticate. I really like what Kentucky shows and how Mark's coaching that group. Duke, Kentucky, Auburn, and an SEC team to be named later. Probably Tennessee. Depends on the bracket.
No, I feel similarly. Duke is the best team in the ACC. There's no doubt about it. It'll be fun to see who tries to hang with them in the standings. At least there are some candidates with Clemson and Pitt and Carolina and maybe somebody else we'll see. But that is the ACC's best ticket to take a long ride. There's no doubt about it. And we'll just have to reassess come March, given injuries and chemistry and other things that can happen over these next couple of months.
That's David Glenn. That's Kerry Keating. I'm Mike Waddell. This has been Time Out. We've taken you through the Big Four: Wake, NC State, Duke, and Carolina. And next week, we're going to tackle an even bigger topic. How is football in the ACC and the spending that is going on in that sport impacting college basketball? That's one for you to chew on. Bring your opinions to. Follow us online on our website, ncsportsnetwork.com. Follow us on social media at the NC Sportsnet. Remember to like and subscribe us as well. We are closing in on 30,000 subscribers here on our YouTube platform, and we thank you very much for your support every week. We'll see you next week right here on Time Out.